Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to open up the Educator's Toolkit and completely demystify curriculum evaluation. Now, if you're involved in education at all, you know that designing a curriculum takes a massive amount of time, energy, and resources. I mean, it's a huge undertaking. But how do we actually know if our teaching is working? How do we measure that invisible transfer of knowledge from the lesson plan to the student's mind? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
So let me ask you, is your curriculum actually working? You know, so often we treat evaluation like it's just this tail-end test, a final exam we just tack on to the end of a semester to assign a grade and move on. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if evaluation isn't just the final inspection, but the actual blueprint for the whole house?
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, the why of curriculum evaluation. Second, 3 types of evaluation. Third, objectives and effectiveness models. Fourth, Stufflebeam's CIPP model. And finally, goal-free and responsive models.
Section 1. The why of curriculum evaluation. Okay, look at the emphasis on the word continuous here. Evaluation is the continuous provision of information for decision-making. It is not an afterthought. But this brings us to a really essential, high-signal question that gets to the core of this whole concept. Why must evaluation be a simultaneous activity with planning rather than just a tail-end process? Well, understanding this is absolutely crucial, because it shifts evaluation from being this passive autopsy of what went wrong to an active, live diagnostic of what can go right. Planning is made on the basis of evaluation and vice versa. It reveals a really deep dependency. Basically, you can't navigate if your eyes are closed until you hit the wall.
So why do we do this? We do it to determine the actual outcomes of a program, to decide, bluntly, whether to accept or reject a program entirely, to figure out if we need to revise our course content, to help future development, and ultimately, to improve our own teaching methods and techniques. It's basically an engine for constant, ongoing improvement.
Section 2. 3 types of evaluation.
To really get a grip on when we should evaluate, imagine you're taking a road trip. First up, we have diagnostic evaluation. Think of this as checking your starting point and making sure the car is actually ready before the journey even begins. You're placing students properly right at the outset, or maybe you're playing detective to discover the underlying causes of learning issues before you even start teaching new material.
Next is formative evaluation. Okay, now you're out on the road. Formative evaluation is basically your GPS recalculating while you're driving. It happens during the course of curriculum development. It's giving you real-time information so you can correct flaws on the fly.
And finally, summative evaluation. You've reached the destination. This happens after the curriculum is fully developed. You're looking at the final effects and asking, okay, do we actually reach our intended destination? But consider this second essential question. How do formative and summative evaluation create a constant dependency loop in curriculum design? Think about it for a second. The summative data from one academic year inevitably becomes the diagnostic and formative data for the next year. Recognizing this cause and effect loop reveals a fundamental truth for educators. A curriculum is never truly finished.
Section 3. Objectives and effectiveness models.
Now we're getting into the specific frameworks, starting with Ralph Tyler's 1950 objective-centered model. As you can see, it is incredibly systematic. You start step 1 with crystal clear behavioral objectives, like students will demonstrate familiarity with nutrition. Then you identify situations to evoke that exact behavior, construct your tests, get the results, compare the pre- and post-tests to estimate the change, and then you modify. It is highly rational. It creates a very clear, easy-to-follow cycle of assessment.
But Tyler's model has a massive blind spot. It heavily emphasizes the pre- and post-tests, the diagnostic and summative parts, but it virtually ignores the formative assessment. It completely ignores the journey. So here's our third essential question to test real understanding. If Tyler's model strictly measures predetermined objectives, what real-world educational outcomes might it blindly ignore? This is a huge deal because it reveals the absolute danger of tunnel vision. For example, if your objective is simply to raise math scores, and you do, well, Tyler's model says you succeeded. But what if the rigid drilling destroyed the student's underlying love for learning? The model literally doesn't test the validity of the objectives themselves. It just asks if you hit the target, even if it's the completely wrong target.
So to add some much-needed checks and balances, we can look at Bradley's 1985 effectiveness model. This is a highly practical, 10-indicator yes or no checklist, and we've highlighted a few key ones here. Take vertical continuity. Do teachers actually know what is taught in the grades above and below them to prevent useless repetition? Or horizontal continuity.
Do classrooms in the exact same grade share common objectives? If any of these indicators get a no, the district knows exactly where they need to make a change. It's a great tool for holding schools responsive and responsible to the real-world execution of the curriculum.
Section 4. Stuffle-Beam's SIP model.
The SIP model, that's context, input, process, and product, is entirely focused on generating data for decision-making. Context assesses the needs to determine goals. Input looks at alternative ways to achieve those goals. Process monitors the actual implementation, which is amazing, finally a model that champions formative evaluation. And product compares the actual ends with the intended ends. But here's the catch, and this is our fourth essential question. How does the SIP model attempt to solve the hierarchy of decision-making, and why might it completely fail in a highly political school district? Well, the model tries to solve decision-making by making it purely data-driven at every single stage. But that reveals its deepest flaw. It assumes organizations are perfectly rational. And let's be real, in the real world, school boards, funding constraints, and district politics often override perfect data. Understanding this teaches us that even the most robust structural framework requires cultural buy-in to actually function.
Section 5. Goal-free and responsive models.
All right, so Tyler is completely objective-centered. But then Michael Scriven came along and introduced the goal-free model. In this setup, the evaluator acts as a totally unbiased observer. They don't even look at what the program intended to do. They literally just look at what the program is actually doing, and that includes the unintended side effects. Remember that math example we talked about? If computational skills go up, but student interest dies, Scriven's model catches that immediately, whereas Tyler's model might call it a total success. Scriven redirects our attention back to the holistic, messy reality of the classroom.
And this idea was pushed even further by Robert Stake's responsive model. Stake advocated for, and I quote, an approach that trades off some measurement precision in order to increase the usefulness of the findings to persons in and around the program. This brings us to our fifth and final essential question. Why would trading measurement precision for usefulness be considered a radical but necessary shift in evaluating student success? Because at the end of the day, education is fundamentally human. Precise quantitative data that a teacher or a student cannot actually use is basically worthless in practice. Stake's model dictates that stakeholder concerns, what the teachers, the parents, and the students actually care about, should determine the evaluation issues. It reveals that real-world application and responsiveness absolutely must trump arbitrary statistical metrics.
So the crucial point to take away from all of this is this. No single evaluation model is perfect on its own. Tyler gives us systemic rigor. Bradley gives us practical checklists. Stufflebeam gives us continuous stage-by-stage data. And Scriven and Stake remind us to stay human, look for the unintended side effects, and actually listen to the stakeholders. The Modern Educator's Toolkit requires mixing these methods so you can see the complete picture.
I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Take a hard look at your own teaching, your own district, your own curriculum. Are you leaning too heavily on the Tyler Post test? Are you ignoring the Scriven side effects? Which evaluation model reveals the true missing piece in your curriculum? Take these frameworks, go diagnose your systems, and elevate your classrooms. Thanks so much for exploring the Educator's Toolkit with me today.